Hello, I'm Rich Lee, and welcome back to the Hall Institute Forum. We're talking with Debbie Holtz from Politicker NJ today, and as we took our break, you were going to give me some great examples of things that have inspired blog postings for you.
Well, I think some of the best stuff comes from the readers. In actuality, I'd like to take credit for the idea. But sometimes I hear from reporters who obviously want to remain anonymous. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I hear from people who clearly have an axe to grind. Sometimes it's regular old citizens who just think that the media has a one-sided perspective, and they're a little bit tougher to judge. But the one thing that I think I'm amazed is that that people are giving you, it's just not a rumor mill type of thing. They'll give you links to sources to try and they make a case. Mm-hmm. So in other words, here's something I think you should take a look at, Debbie, and here's some documentation on what I think. I had one reader wrote to me about, a reporter who they felt plagiarized a story, and, I had like 6 or 7 links in there so that I could actually look at the two articles side by side. So they even do some of the homework for you. They do a lot of the homework, and sometimes they, even in a critique, something that I think I'm going to take a look at recently is I have something called, some features that I try to look at and cover, like the black hole. So sometimes in the Woodward and Bernstein style, the media is all interested in charging, after an issue, and given the daily deadlines and the business, it falls off the radar screen and nothing gets resolved. So every once in a while I'll say, hey, whatever happened to such and such? Looks like it fell into a black hole. And recently I got a comment from a reader who said, that's a racist statement, and the black hole. And of course I was referring to the astrological, physical aspect of black hole, but gave me a lot of links, and there's actually been, debates in town councils across the country where, that charge has been there. So given the backdrop of gender and race in the presidential election, I think it's something, I know what my intent was, but, I think it's something I'll throw out to the experts and say, what do you think about this? How careful do we have to be when we're reporting that that someone isn't interpreting a statement or a characterization as racist or sexist or biased in some way? But it was a criticism of me, but even if I didn't necessarily agree with it, I thought, well, somebody's thinking about it. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, and with the internet, you put something out there and people are going to find it all over the country, all over the world. And,
it is. In fact, I think a couple of the links I got came from the state of Texas, where this actually became a hotted issue in a local council debate. So, but it's interesting. So, again, it may not be my perspective, but maybe I'll be enlightened when I talk to the experts, and maybe I'll change my mind. And I think that's part of what this blog is supposed to do. Yeah. Did we get it right? Did we get it close? And of course, that means we have to put ourselves under that perspective. There's a lot of times I'll get stuff with people say to me, what about your site? What about your reporters on Politicker NJ? Yeah. Why did they do this? Or I'll hear from editors. You got away with this, what's your call? And so I go back to the editors and the manager and the people that hired me and said, you got to give me a comment on this because I'm going to write about it. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but at least for our site, I give them credit because they own it. And, when I did the piece on ethics and post-employment restrictions on reporters, Politicker NJ said, we don't have that policy in place for ourselves, but we think that we're going to have it. I'm sure I lost a lot of any friends with the reporters at the site. Our 25 reporters nationwide weren't happy with that. But if it's good for the goose, as the saying
I have
goes.
Noticed that there's been times when you've raised questions or asked questions about your own site, and that obviously adds a lot more credibility to what you do. With the New York Times, you have the public editor, I think, does some great columns, looking what their reporters, and a number of publications have similar things in place. Right. Let's spend a few minutes maybe talking about the bigger issues you've been observing. I guess we've all been observing the media for a long time, but maybe you've been taking a closer look at it the last 12 months or so. A lot happening nationwide. We had talked the other day about, the media being a business, and I think it was the LA Times you were talking about being sold.
Yeah,
maybe make that point again.
There was a great documentary put together by PBS's Frontline, which just talked about, covered the whole gamut of newsmakers, from sources, confidential sources, the Valerie Plame, the coverage of, weapons of mass destruction, and right down to the relationship that exists between government and the Fourth Estate. And, but they looked at the business side, both the television news side and the newspaper side. And the thing that I found was most interesting was, case in point, the Los Angeles Times. If you read the popular press or any, the business press, you would think that the Los Angeles Times is losing money left and right. John Cullen, who left the Baltimore Sun to become the managing editor when the Chicago Tribune bought the site in 2000, basically said, you know what, we gross $1 billion a year, we make $200 million in profit, and that's 20%. That's twice as high as much as any Fortune 500 company. The problem is it doesn't meet Wall Street's expectations. It's not a growth industry. That's ironic, considering the state that we find Wall Street in these days, that nobody could sustain that kind of growth forever. But that's really one of the death knells in the, in those ownership groups that are traded publicly, not in the private held companies necessarily. As you and I have talked about over, the months, there's other economic dynamics going on with respect to newspapers and the business. But they're still very profitable, yet unfortunately there's this pressure to make them more profitable, to make them profit centers.
Ask you just to hold on for a second. We're about due for a break, but certainly it does have a direct impact on what's happening in the news media today. So we'll take a short break and we'll be back for a final segment to talk about the media in New Jersey.